On August 7th, 2006, at exactly 5:15 p.m., surveillance footage captured four masked men entering the Bank of America in Tacoma, Washington, wearing balaclavas and lightweight body armor, armed with guns, and a flawless plan. The bandits, as the FBI often calls robbers, had very defined AORs, or areas of responsibilities. Two men with AK-47s covered the points of entry, another collected stacks of cash from the tellers in the vault, while the obvious ringleader gave orders in a clear and concise manner. 2 minutes and 21 seconds later, the bandits thanked the people in the bank for their cooperation, exited the bank, climbed into the getaway vehicle, and drove off with the duffel bag stuffed with $54,011. Now, if this sounds like the job was executed with military precision and efficiency, that's because it was. 3 of the 5 men involved, including the ringleader, were U.S. Army Rangers, still on active duty. To this day, it is still one of the most efficient bank robberies in recent memory, reminiscent of Jesse James and his band of outlaws. Only this crew wouldn't stay outlaws for long. Despite weeks of training, or perhaps years depending on how you look at it, they were all eventually identified and caught. Because as prepared as they were, the Rangers had overlooked one small but very important detail. So let's break down the story of the Army Rangers bank heist. We're going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. The Tacoma bank robbery is certainly one of the most fascinating bank robberies to take place on US soil. Fascinating, yes, because the job was carried out by an elite rank of soldiers, all of whom ironically took an oath to protect the country. But it's also an interesting story due to the personalities involved and the psychological components at play. In less than 3 minutes, a handful of soldiers showcase just how easily the boundaries between military training and crime can be blurred by someone with the wrong intentions, or I guess really cool intentions, depending how you look at it. On top of that, there's the additional complication of potential mental health concerns, with post-traumatic stress and other emotional elements very possibly playing a part. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that the US military is complicit or even responsible for the actions of a few rogue soldiers. From everything they did, it seems pretty apparent that they were capable of their own decision-making. But as I'm sure many of you are aware, the military is no stranger to controversy, especially when it comes to their handling of mental health issues within their own ranks. When they are responsible for training and arming hundreds of thousands of Americans each year to defend their country, sometimes with violent force when needed, it's worth examining the military's role in ensuring their soldiers' mental safety is intact as well as physical safety. I'm sure any person you've ever met who's been in the military has some horror story about dealing with the VA. Now, I'm certainly no Dr. Phil, and I won't pretend to be, but thankfully, I guess, even Dr. Phil himself would end up providing some insightful commentary into this whole matter, but more on that later. For now, let's get into the bandits themselves, starting with Alex Blum. Starting with the youngest member of the group, the newest Ranger, who was less than 2 weeks away from his first deployment to Baghdad. Ultimately, he would make the one big mistake that would lead to the team's downfall. Alex Blum loved 2 things: the US Army and NHL hockey. Alex had always wanted to be a Ranger, and while most hockey fans would assume that meant playing for the NHL team in New York, the only kind of Ranger that Blum wanted to be was the kind that served in the US Army. According to Blum's cousin, who wrote a book exploring Alex's criminal motives that have long plagued and puzzled his family, Alex was a good kid with a dream to serve his country. After his hockey career ended post-high school, Alex joined the military to pursue his real dream. He did his 10 weeks of basic at Fort Benning, Georgia. Basic training in itself is exhausting, physically but perhaps mentally most of all, which makes sense. Warfare requires a soldier to not only be able to remain calm in the highest of high-stress environments, but to also execute a prepared plan under those same conditions, which conveniently makes great recruiting ground for a bank robbery. Alex finished basic, but it left him a shell of his former self. It seemed that the constant negative reinforcement and degradation had taken a toll on him. However, none of it was enough to stop Alex from chasing his ultimate goal. And so, despite being zapped of all his confidence and self-worth, and turning down the good chunk of cash his uncle had offered him as a bribe to withdraw, which tells you how bad things probably were, Alex pushed forward with his Army Ranger dreams. Speaking of the Rangers, you're probably familiar with them to some degree, but for those of you who aren't, they are a specialist unit of the Army. According to the Ranger website, it says that being a Ranger is an honor shared by a select few, calling for mental toughness, physical fitness, moral character, and motivation. Pay special attention to the whole moral character thing. Basically, becoming a Ranger is the surest path to the idealized American soldier. The Rangers are within the U.S. Army Special Operations Command and do a lot of the high-speed things you think of soldiers doing. Things like rappelling out of helicopters, doing recon under beautiful foreign skies, wearing night vision goggles. Words like special ops, raids, forcible entry, assault missions, precision, and heavy firepower come to mind. In essence, the Army wants you to know that becoming a Ranger will grant an exclusive access to join a one-of-a-kind fraternity, the kind that has really big guns and awesome machinery where you get to do cool guy things. So who could blame Alex from doing anything he could, not only to become a Ranger, but to excel at being one? Following basic, Alex immediately applied for and enrolled in the Rangers Indoctrination Program, or RIP. It's defined as a combat leadership school that prepares soldiers for small unit tactics, ambushes, raids, and urban assaults. Essentially, RIP was boot camp on steroids. So Alex, along with every other Ranger, had to complete an additional 4 weeks of even more intense training. So that means 4 weeks of physical exertion, punishment, degradation, sleep deprivation, all used as tools to weed out the weak. Overall, the goal is to break you down only to build you back up into something stronger. The same idea seen with a lot of sports teams or religious groups. But according to Alex's account of RIP, the process pushed this philosophy to an extreme degree. He was forced to snort chewing tobacco, drop hot sauce into his eyes, and cut his earlobes to stay alert and awake. Passing the program takes an incredible amount of will. On average, 1/3 of those who start the program will finish it. It is indeed true that few earn the right to wear the Red Ranger tab on their uniforms, and Alex did it at 18 years old. This is a truly remarkable accomplishment, but at the same time, that level of mental stress can have an undeniable effect on one's brain, especially someone that young, which according to the National Institute of Health isn't fully developed until the age of 25. I'm not going to play armchair psychologist, at least not any more than I normally do. That's Dr. Phil's job. But the psychological results of undergoing RIP as a teenager should absolutely be considered. Again, given the gift of hindsight, because we know where this story's going. Anyways, with that, the newly minted Private First Class Blum reported to the 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion in Fort Lewis. And it was here on the outskirts of Tacoma, Washington, that he would prepare for a 3-month tour to Baghdad, Iraq during the global war on terror. The city of Tacoma itself is a bit of a juxtaposition. It's sitting 150 miles south of the Canadian border. The liberal-leaning city is contrasted by a large military-industrial complex. The Army's Fort Lewis, now combined with the McChord Air Force Base, is the area's largest employer by far. So you'd never know this by visiting the north side of Tacoma, but travel to the south side and you'll pick up on hints like the increased presence of gun shops, pickup trucks, and nursing homes advertising deals for veterans. And it's on this south side of Tacoma where many of the soldiers stationed at Fort Lewis have checking accounts at the nearby Bank of America. Army Ranger Specialist Luke Sumner was one of those soldiers. Sumner, the aforementioned ringleader, was the textbook man's man, equal parts machismo and leader. A brazen yet magnetic personality underscored by his unrelenting enthusiasm. Or as others would go on to describe him, highly manipulative and insane. Perhaps the most alarming example of this description were the suicide checks Sumner would conduct in the barracks. What are these suicide checks, you may ask? Well, Sumner would force a gun into the hands of a friend, demand them to put the barrel to their head and pull the trigger. You know, just guys being dudes. Sumner rationalized this as a way for his soldiers to prove their loyalty to the Army, but I think it's fair to say this was his own way of testing their loyalty to him. There's a fine line between like hazing and summer camp pranks to kind of mess with the new recruits or bring together like the brotherhood within the military, and making someone hold a gun to their head and pull the trigger. Private First Class Alex Blum did not know and could not see how toxic Sumner was. All he saw was an opportunity to prove himself as the Army Ranger he had always wanted to be. Interestingly, Luke Sumner was only 1 year older than Blum and only 1 rank higher. But Sumner had had a lot more military experience, having already served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. So Blum respected that. Depending on who you ask, Sumner either took Blum under his wing to show him the ropes, or Blum was looking for a mentor and found one in Sumner. But ultimately, what matters is that Sumner and Blum spent a lot of time together. Sumner would share war stories from his tours, giving advice in the political game that is the US military to an impressionable young soldier. Not long after they met, Sumner would introduce Blum to another Ranger friend, Chad Palmer. Palmer was the type of guy to post with guns on his MySpace page, unlike us cool kids who just do that on Twitter. I was unable to find the songs that he had queued up on his profile, but you can probably make an educated guess. And just like that, a trio was formed. They would go out in Tacoma whenever they had downtime, to bars, porn shops, Dairy Queen. Maybe after too much time in a rather unregulated war space, Sumner forgot how normal people conversed. But it was in these social hangs in civilian settings that he would play war games. What is a war game, you might ask? Well, instead of talking about sports or girls or the impending subprime mortgage crisis, Sumner would quiz Blum and Palmer on special ops tactics in whatever building or structure they were in. Where's our infill? Where's our exfil? Where are the red zones? Again, things that might be seen as fun or in jest if you didn't know where this story was going. The others didn't know it, but Sumner was preparing them for something he had been plotting for quite some time. Something big. Unlike Alex Blum, the Army Rangers were never Sumner's end goal. It was a means to an end. Sumner, who had dual American and Canadian citizenship, was planning to start a motorcycle gang. And not just any kind of motorcycle gang. Sumner wanted to build a gang that would rival the notorious Hells Angels of the Northwest and British Columbia. The select few colleagues that Sumner told this to were quick to buy in, especially Tiger Robertson, a member of the Canadian Military Reserves. Before the gang even started, Sumner offered Robertson the rank of captain, whatever that entails. In this theoretical gang, members would climb ranks much faster than they could in the military. That was attractive to Robertson, and he was willing to prove he was worthy. But if he was going to start and win a turf war, Sumner would need a lot of firepower. Firepower, especially the unregistered kind, costs money. When a soldier re-enlists, he or she receives a $20,000 bonus. Most put that money in savings, pay off loans, give some to mom, buy a Camaro, but not Sumner. He re-enlisted in May of 2006 and used his $20,000 bonus to buy 5 handguns, 4 rifles, a shotgun, and a few grenades. This seemed to be the groundwork of his gang ideation, but he wasn't done yet. He would need more money. A lot more. Lucky for Sumner, he had a grand plan on how to get that money. And no, not the bank just yet. Sumner had his sights set elsewhere first. He texted Robertson and another friend, Nathan Dunmall, to pitch them his plan. Dunmall was an 18-year-old Canadian civilian with no military experience, but he was a willing member of Sumner's yet-to-be-named gang, and that loyalty was all that Luke needed. The text exchange went as follows. Sumner says, "We're going to hit this casino and we have a solid plan. We have a driver, 2 rangers, and you 2. So I hope you're ready to rock and roll." Robertson replies, "F yeah," and Sumner says, "Chance it might go North Hollywood, so I really hope you're in the mood." Oh, look at that. He misspelled your and also mentioned the North Hollywood shootout. He is just like me for real. Oh, what's North Hollywood, you might ask? Oh, would you look at that? I did a video about it on the main channel. Oh, look at that. Okay. Sumner, it should be noted, was obsessed with robberies. He researched them constantly, learning about the most famous ones as well as the more obscure. Getting Blum and Palmer to commit would be easy. After all, they eagerly participated in his suicide checks without question. What's robbing a casino? What wasn't so easy were the logistics of the Chips Casino in Lakewood. Despite several recon trips around the area, the wargame quizzes, and the late-night conversations with Blum and Palmer about how they would theoretically rob the casino, it was proving more difficult than they imagined. So Luke Sumner sought the advice from another ranger, Scott Byrne. Byrne understood Sumner's ambitions, but would only agree to help plan the hit. He was adamant that he would not participate in the execution, but after talking through the plan, Byrne convinced Sumner that robbing the casino was logistically insurmountable. Casinos have too many countermeasures in place, not to mention the biggest obstacle of all, none of the bandits were actually old enough to enter the casino, as none of them were even 21. So this obviously would make more detailed recon as well as infill next to impossible. Because unless you're planning to show up with guns and just be loud and I guess steal the money off of the people at the tables rather than getting any actual money from the back that would be locked up by that point, you can't use an ID to get in the first place. It would be really funny if they got fake IDs to get into the casino to start the heist, but they got caught at the door and like arrested for having a fake ID. I wonder if that's ever happened before. If there's anyone that like went to a casino or a bar or something like that with the plan to rob it, but their fake got caught, so they just got turned around at the door and just never told anyone about it. Part of the reason I bring this up is to remind you that this group was just kids who were given tremendous authority and training. I mean, before they were legally old enough to buy a beer or once again enter a casino, they were tasked with saving a country. Many people can and have been able to handle that responsibility, but for this group of young men, their background was seen as their opportunity to cash in. But how? The casino was out of the question. With its robust surveillance system, trained personnel, firewalls, and the Rangers' age limitations, it was a no-go. But what about a bank, like hypothetically the Bank of America on South Tacoma Way? That was perfect, and it was only 2 miles away from Fort Lewis. Like many of the other soldiers stationed at Fort Lewis, Sumner had an account at this bank, and it was the perfect way in as he could do some close tactical recon by just going in to check his account. On August 3rd, 4 days before the robbery, Sumner and Blum drove around the bank, at first checking for the right streets for the perfect getaway. Then they entered the bank. Once inside, Sumner approached a teller where he withdrew a small sum of cash. As the teller counted, Sumner subtly used his ATM card to measure the thickness of bulletproof glass of the 8-foot-tall bandit barrier, or the thing to keep people who are trying to rob banks from getting over the teller's desk. To buy more time, he asked for a printout of his account transactions as Blum continued measuring distances, counted employees, and surveyed infill and exfil points. Now, the morality of all of this probably seems pretty clear to most people. You are thoroughly preparing to commit an armed robbery. But according to Blum, he thought this was just another one of Sumner's mentorship test in preparation for his upcoming deployment. More war games. The equivalent of, I thought everything in the group chat was just jokes, Your Honor. In line with their months and years of Ranger training, our bandits, Sumner, Blum, Palmer, Robertson, and Dunmore, found an isolated area on the barracks, laid out sandbags and sticks to recreate a blueprint of the bank, and conducted dozens of dress rehearsals in full gear. They did this over and over again, staging the sandbags to be like a shoot house that matched the interior of the bank, until they were able to execute the plan to perfection. The days of suicide checks were behind them. Now, they had a bigger mission to focus on. See, the goal was to get in and out in under 90 seconds. If they absolutely had to, they'd settle for under 180 seconds or 3 minutes. According to their exhaustive recon, 3 minutes was the maximum time to pull off the robbery before the Tacoma police would show up. But with all of their practice and perfection, going over that limit wasn't a concern. So finally, the team was ready and the day of the job was here. They piled into Alex's silver Audi A4 with duffel bags, masks, AK-47s, 9mm handguns, and enough ammunition that would rival the North Hollywood shootout should the day come down to a shootout. They drove the 2 miles to the bank during Tacoma rush hour, with Sumner going over the plan one last time. Throughout all this, Alex Blum would later maintain he believed all of this was an exercise. They weren't committing a crime, he'd say, they were carrying out orders. Which I understand to a degree, like being in the bank with your boys, and then one of your boys like, hey, I bet we could, like, you could rob it this way, or you would have to go in here or go out here. 1 or 2 of those is fine. But when you're setting up sandbags to run the course and now you're holding rifles on the way to the bank, just the idea of someone being like, haha, funny joke, guys. We're really going to show them, haha. Maybe it would have helped clarify things for Blum if he had been one of the 4 men to enter the bank. If he was the one who shouted the countdown for those 2 minutes and 21 seconds, or to stuff $54,000 in a duffel bag. Maybe if he had been the one to aim the 9mm at the 19-year-old teller's heart, which was about to pop out of her chest. Would have dawned on him that he was committing a serious crime. But Alex Blum was the getaway driver. He was the only one not in body armor, opting to wear board shorts and flip-flops instead. He didn't hear Sumner yell out, "If this bag isn't full by the time I'm done counting, I'm going to waste all of you." He didn't see Sumner hoist himself over the 8-foot-tall bandit barrier with one arm, what the FBI lead investigator would call the single most athletic display in all of the bank robberies he's ever seen. He didn't witness the patrons and employees fearing for their lives. And as bizarre as this sounds, even as the 5 bandits drove away $50,000 richer, Alex still maintained he was just following the the chain of command. I understand the whole, like, you know, he's a new guy in the army and he has respect for this other guy and he doesn't want to disappoint him and stuff like that. And again, to some degree, I kind of understand him thinking it was a joke. So it's funny to imagine that he thought it was a joke up until the robbery was happening, where like he's driving to the bank and everyone's like wearing ski masks and body armor with rifles. And he's like, haha, you guys are so funny. And then he parks on the other side of the street and they get out. And he's like, guys, just the idea of a kid like 2.5 minutes sitting in the driver's seat, like they're not serious, are they? Which, to clarify, he absolutely knew it was real at that point, but it's funny if he didn't. With deployment just over a week away, the 75th Battalion was given some R&R to spend time with family or blow off some steam. Sumner and his crew used this time to lay low. They split the money evenly, each member receiving a $10,000 cut. The leftover was put in a pot towards Sumner's future gang, and then they split ways. Palmer flew home to Norfolk, Virginia. Robertson and Dunmall took a bus back across the Canadian border. Sumner and Blum first went back to the barracks to drop off the guns, armor, and leftover rounds in Sumner's room. Then Sumner booked it back to his family's home in Canada, and Blum flew home to Denver the next day, hoping to spend the next week catching up with his family. But that never happened. As impressive of a feat that bank robbery was, there was one small oversight, and it left the entire operation, to use a military super technical high operation special forces term, FUBAR. Immediately following the robbery, one person sought out the police to give a statement. The witness had seen 4 masked men jumping out of an Audi with guns. Unlike Private First Class Blum, this person didn't think it was an exercise. He saw it for what it was and quickly jotted down the license plate number. I am not kidding. They forgot to remove the front license plate number. If I recall right, they took off the rear license plate, and it sounds like a no-brainer, but believe it or not, Blum did not change, cover, or remove the Audi's front license plate. All of those months at basic and RIP, all of that time practicing infills and exfills, all of the high caliber weaponry acquired in case things went North Hollywood, all of it was for naught. Which that adds a whole other layer to the joke in my head. Because if it's funny to imagine Alex didn't know they were actually robbing the bank until he was sitting in the parking lot of the bank, it's even funnier to imagine that he has the realization that they're actually robbing it, immediately followed by the realization that he didn't take off the front license plate. All of that training, all of that precision. Like, if Sumner was such a super high technical guy to think through, you know, every layer of this case, to know how thick the glass was he had to jump over to get behind the teller's desk and stuff like that, you think he would have walked around the car before they went to the robbery. Like, it always blows my mind when someone can be so smart yet so stupid. Not long after it was reported, the license plate number made it into the hands of FBI Special Agent Monty Shade. Is that his name? Monty Shade? That is insane. Maybe it's pronounced Shade. It might be pronounced Shade or something like that, but I'm going to keep calling him Shade because Monty Shade sounds like a superhero. Shade had more than 400 bank robbery investigations to his name, most of which were amateur at best. But the surveillance footage of this left him impressed. Given the weaponry, athleticism, and CQB tactics, Shade had an idea of who it could have been under those masks. Probably 30 minutes before they ran the license plate number. Fort Lewis was the source of dozens of soldier-related criminal cases since the War on Terror commenced. Between 2005 and 2007 alone, Tacoma notched 20 plus of such felonies. Just a few quick soldier-related crimes in the area include one case of a soldier robbing local college students at gunpoint, a case of kidnapping, assaulting and torturing a sex worker, and a string of robberies while high on meth. Clarify, that's not all the same person, multiple soldiers. So it wasn't a stretch by any means for Shade to make the assumption that this crime was committed by members of the armed forces. So he drove to Fort Lewis and asked them to locate an Audi with Colorado plates and the license plate number of 420 NNA. Haha, 420. And that's exactly what he did. The Audi was easily found outside of Barracks Building 3475, where Sumner and Blum were quartered. The car, which was registered to Alex Blum's father in Greenwood Village, Colorado, was enough evidence to obtain a federal warrant to search Sumner and Blum's rooms. And investigators found several unregistered weapons, along with mags and loads of ammunition. In the ceiling and hidden under a desk, they found stacks of cash with Bank of America bands around them. On Monday, the Rangers robbed the bank. On Tuesday, investigators searched the Rangers' room, and on Wednesday, the FBI arrested Alex Blum in his parents' Greenwood Village home. His dream of being an Army Ranger was dead before his first deployment. The kid, whose dream was to serve his country by joining an elite unit designed to keep American citizens safe, confessed to a major felony. And he would name everyone involved. The more I think about this case, maybe he did think it was a joke. Maybe between forgetting the license plate, wearing flip-flops, and just confessing everything, he might have actually got pranked. Yeah, fun way to prank your friends, everyone. Rob a Bank of America, but don't tell them until they're in the middle of a heist. Chad Palmer was next. While with his family in full dress uniform, about to take family photos, SWAT surrounded him and hauled him away. Palmer quickly confessed, outlining the operation in detail. Apprehending the other 3 bandits would require a little more effort due to extradition. Again, all 3 of them were in Canada, but Robertson made it easy by surrendering at the border. Dunmore was picked up in Chilliwack, British Columbia, and Sumner, the leader and mastermind of the hit, was arrested at a local supermarket in a quaint town of 5,000 after his dad spoke to the feds. Within 11 days of the crime, the jig, as they say, was up. But it was not over. Sumner, as you can imagine, did not go as quietly as the others. He was put on house arrest as he fought extradition to the U.S. It was during this time that the small Tacoma robbery became a national interest, especially once Sumner claimed that his actions were an act of political protest. In a videotaped admission of guilt, Sumner admitted to planning the robbery, being its leader, supplying the weapons, and stealing $50,000, but only to get the public's attention to expose the atrocities he witnessed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Sumner invited reporters into his parents' basement to tell them about the soldiers that he says raped an Iraqi woman in a semi-truck, and the group of Navy SEALs he said murdered Afghans as a release. He talked about the thousands of guns U.S. soldiers are smuggling back into the States, including those used in the robbery itself. This did get the attention of higher-ups in the Army, who conducted an internal investigation. After thoroughly investigating all of Sumner's claims, they determined none of these claims were true, and the media moved on shortly thereafter. Which that is always a funny strategy, to be caught for a felony, something serious like robbing a bank, and when it's time to be arrested, you're like, this was an act of political protest. And I didn't tell anyone about it then, and I didn't actually, contribute any protest elements or any political messaging on, every other step of this mission, because I knew you'd be here. I knew this would wind up with me under house arrest in Canada with cameras, and it's time to tell my story. What's that? All of those stories were fake? Well, I'm not leaving. But Sumner's crimes didn't stop there. The following summer, while still on house arrest and battling extradition, he escaped house arrest, leaving behind this note. Quote, "If you're wondering whether I am a danger to the public or not, rest assured. I have no intention of doing anything that will put people at risk, and if you find me, I will go quietly," which is an elaborate way of saying I'm making a run for it. Sumner made it all the way to an IKEA in Vancouver before he was arrested again a month later. And he did keep his word. He went quietly. He even stopped fighting his extradition as part of his guilty plea. If there was ever a building to lose a SWAT team in, it would be an IKEA. But now, armed with an attorney, his plea included a new defense: PTSD. That is right, post-traumatic stress disorder. From training, from his time in the Middle East, from witnessing illegal interrogation tactics. Now, I'm not here to debate whether this is true or not. I'm not nearly qualified, although that hasn't stopped me in the past. But there is a solid chance that Sumner is telling the truth. Unfortunately for him, most of those Tacoma-based soldiers who were caught committing crimes also cited PTSD as their defense, and the judge was not swayed. The memo from the U.S. Attorney's Office to the court read as follows. Quote, "It was one of the most dangerous bank robberies ever committed in Washington. Sumner and his gang were prepared for combat. If the police had shown up during the robbery, there would have been a bloodbath on the streets of Tacoma." End quote. And the prosecutor in this case, Michael Dion, would say this of Sumner. Quote, "While we don't know if he has a mental problem, we do know he has a moral defect." End quote. A description that is antithetical to an Army Ranger, at least according to their website. The judge in the case sentenced Sumner to 24 years in prison, and the Army served Sumner with a dishonorable discharge. While in prison, Sumner offered to pay a hitman $20,000 to kill Michael Dion. So very reformed and remorseful for his crimes, I'm sure. Fortunately for Sumner, that hitman was actually an undercover FBI officer. Sumner had also tried to stab his co-conspirator, Nathan Dunmall, with a shiv made from a stair-step machine, adding another 20 years to his sentence. Today, Sumner is still serving out his sentence. However, a few years ago, a judge took pity on Sumner, given his diagnosis of PTSD, and reduced his sentence by 12 years. As far as the rest of the crew, Robertson was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison plus 5 years of supervised release. Palmer got 11 years plus 5 years of supervised release. Dunmall got 10 years plus 5 years of supervised release. For his part, Alex Blum got 16 months in SeaTac Federal Detention Center in Washington. That is right, a year and 4 months. For the first half of it, he continued to stay in Ranger shape, working out in secret since working out was not allowed in this facility, seemingly waiting for his release and to be sent out on deployment, but of course, that never happened. The reality is that the other Rangers looted his room, stole his stuff, and he was dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. Blum spent the next half of his sentence coming to grips that his Ranger dream was completely and finally dead. After reading a book that his father gave him about cult leaders and brainwashing, Blum spent the next several years telling anyone who would listen that he was actually a victim. This included, as I promised you at the beginning of this video, an appearance on Dr. Phil. In this episode, Blum told Dr. Phil and the audience how it all played out in his brain. He was just being a good soldier, following the chain of command, doing everything that was drilled into him as an 18-year-old going through basic training and the Ranger indoctrination program. I mean, how was he expected to unmarry that experience from the rest of his life? Dr. Phil simply and slowly responded with more of a sentence than a question. Quote, "So what you're telling me is that you did not know that you were involved in an armed robbery of a bank." End quote. With all the world watching, Alex maintained his truth. It wasn't until years later, when his cousin Ben began writing his book and pushing the issue, that Blum, maybe cathartically, revealed what he had known all along. Quote from Blum, "I had full knowledge of the robbery before it happened. I knew what we were doing." And of his motive, Blum said, quote, "I didn't want to seem like I was a pussy in front of Sumner. I didn't want to show him I was afraid." So as hilarious as it would be if he got punked into a robbery, sadly it seems that didn't happen. But at least he came to terms with it publicly eventually. And with that, we have the story of the Army Rangers bank heist, one of the most perfectly executed bank heists ever that fell apart because a dude forgot to take off a license plate. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching. This is a topic that I wanted to cover on the main channel, but when I covered it initially, I didn't think there was enough meat there to make like an hour-long one. Or typically whenever I cover like a bank robbery on the main channel, I want to be able to draw out the, specifics of where people were and what they were doing. And the heist itself wasn't that interesting, other than the fact that it was really quick and efficient. But putting it together with, the writers and researchers here on the second channel, they're able to get a lot of information about like Dr. Phil and like Sumner and stuff like that kind of fleshed out the story more. So I thought it was a perfect fit here. So hopefully you all enjoyed. I certainly enjoyed talking about it. It's an interesting case for sure. And let me know if you want to see more like this. Again, everyone who worked on the video will be credited in the description. As always, thank you so much to them. This literally would not be possible without them. I believe that should do it for now, but I just want to say thank you for watching. Hope that you enjoyed, and we will see you in the next one. Bye!